Hey guys, welcome to Physicality. Today I want to talk about horror movies, and in particular, what makes a classic horror movie. Now, with horror, it's been around for about 100 years. It's been around since the start of film. We have films there like the universal classics, obviously Frankenstein, Dracula, The Invisible Man, Wolfman, there's all of these classic horror movies. But what makes a classic horror movie? I think it's something that gets overlooked in the modern age with film. We think about film as this living, breathing entity of like the film industry is always working. Some people might say it's woke at the moment. I think that's a term that gets thrown around a lot online. But what makes a classic horror movie? What makes a horror movie memorable to the audience? When we think of stuff like Hitchcock's Psycho, I'm just going to go off camera here for 2 seconds. When we think of stuff like Hitchcock and how he did thrillers, you could even say thriller borderlines kind of where horror became like sooner or later. When we think about stuff like Psycho, stuff like Vertigo, stuff like Rear Window, and even The Birds is definitely classic horror. But when we think of these movies, they're memorable to an audience. And why are they memorable? Because when you get an actor like Jimmy Stewart, for example, with Vertigo and also Rear Window, you have a memorable performance. Even if you don't have a antagonist there, like someone to play things off, you still have that memorable performance where it's like, yes, this is kind of memorable to me. I go away from it and say, I remember that. I know what I watched. I know about that. It becomes much harder with stuff like Old. I have talked about this movie recently. M. Night Shyamalan. I did not like this movie. I've got it in my collection, obviously, because I had problems, but, I didn't like this movie. It's one of those movies that just was drawn for plot. It was like, okay, now they're this, now they're that, oh, now this happened. I felt like the plot was all over the place. But with Psycho, there's a very cohesive plot. There's a very, like, okay, this is happening, then this is happening, and it's leading to here. You have a start, a middle, and an end. And that movie is very iconic for a reason. Because when you come to stuff like Psycho, and even like modern classics, American Psycho, for example, this is kind of where we start seeing a line drawn in the sand of horror movies can be something that defines a film taste. It can be something that really resonates with an audience. Now, I've got on the Rowdy Roddy Piper shirt, so it would be irresponsible of me not to mention They Live. This movie has taken on an iconic role in recent years because of, the thing of this movie is like consumerism. It's like attacking where like society prioritizes money and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of stuff with They Live that really holds up well in modern movies. And when something holds up really well, you really have a cult following to it, if for lack of a better term. There is a cult following to They Live. Also, Rowdy Roddy Piper is just amazing. I mean, if you're a fan of this, check out his wrestling work. Like, he's one of the best workers in terms of on the mic of all time. But with They Live, it has a cult following for a reason. Because it has such an iconic portrayal by Rowdy Roddy Piper. Because it has such memorable storylines that people can paste into their life. It can paste it into where they're at the moment, where they are in life, what society prioritizes. And even when it doesn't relate directly, like The Thing, you kind of have a movie that does relate to an audience because, Kurt Russell is so iconic in it, but also, what would you do if there was this horror movie playing out in the snow? It kind of puts you in, like, isolation. It's like, you can suspend your disbelief. And so often with horror movies, modern horror movies in particular, they ask so much for suspending your disbelief or just throw gore at you for 2 hours. And sometimes that's not always the case. I mean, I've referenced it recently about Blair Witch. The reason I hold this to such high regard is because you don't actually see the Blair Witch. What you have to do is you have to put it in your mind of what are you actually watching. And I have my own theory for this movie of like, I think this movie went a very dark path and that the guys were actually still alive and all that stuff. But I have a dark theory on this movie. But stuff like that, like the Blair Witch, that is iconic for a reason because, yes, shaky cam, we can all say what we will about shaky cam, but it had a purpose. It used viral marketing of the internet of the time, and it was viral for its time. Now, people might say, oh, that's not scary, you don't actually see anything. That's the point. It lets your mind fill in the blanks. So for me, I think that's one of the most scary horror movies of all time, because you are not actually getting much. Now, there's one right up here on the shelf right there, Dawn of the Dead, another great horror movie. People hold that to such high regard because it's inspired the entire zombie genre, and you can say, yes, but Night of the Living Dead was the original by Romero. Yes, Night of the Living Dead was the original. But Dawn of the Dead took it to a whole other level. It's still done to this day, where stuff like The Walking Dead draw from that, stuff like The Last of Us, stuff like, there's another zombie one there, I forget what it's called, not World War Z, but you know what I mean. A lot of them are inspired by Romero's work, and even Argento, because Argento did a cut of it, so, people are inspired by that. And that's what I mean about classic horror. Classic horror is something you can kind of continuously go back to. I mean, I've said it over here, this recently had a release of all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Now, I will make a separate video about whether you really need that release. I mean, for me, I have this release of Elm Street. And they've put all the movies on 4K, but in this kind of package again. And I want them all in slipcovers, but also there was a part of me that was questioning whether I actually need parts 2 through whatever, New Nightmare, There's like 6 to 8 movies or something. Realistically, the first one is the iconic one. That's the one that I'm nostalgic for. That's the one that most people remember. Now, Dream Warriors is definitely one that I hold in high regard as well. I do like Dream Warriors. I do like New Nightmare. I think New Nightmare redefined the genre. But also, New Nightmare paved the way for Scream. But there's a part of me that also really feels, outside of the first one, do I really need the rest on 4K? And I will do a bigger video on that at some point. But look at it this way. Most people love Scream. Most people love Scream. It's one of the most iconic horror series of all time. But when I start looking at Scream here and saying, like, I've got all the Scream movies, except for number 4, because they will never put 4 out on 4K for some reason. But I've got all the Scream movies except for number 4. I did like number 2. I really like number 2. I think that's one of the most genius follow-ups. Like, you have Randy there talking through what a sequel means. Like, you have that one. 3's a bit disappointing. I mean, I would have released number 4 instead of number 3, but I mean, it's good to have 3 on 4K, it's very good. And then you have the remakes, or reboots, because Hollywood just needed to rehash stuff. But also, I think this gets it right because they are still having the original writer in there. So let's put that back. Let's put all these back on the shelf. When we start looking at classic horror, I'm looking at one right here, Rosemary's Baby. I've never actually watched that movie in full. I mean, this is definitely one that I'm like, I should watch it. But I really think it does scare me, the plot of that. It does scare me what came of this, It does scare me. But I do consider it a movie that I need to have in the collection. And also, is that Polanski? Roman Polanski? I think it's Roman Polanski. They're not going to put it on the cover because they don't want to advertise Roman Polanski, but I'm guessing it's Roman Polanski if I'm not mistaken. There's a lot of classic horror movies. People don't even hold these ones in high regard, the Resident Evil films. But for me, these are memorable because when I was coming up as a teenager, the Resident Evil films were everywhere. Now, given I did play the games, I was never big into the games. But for me, what is her name? Mila Djokovic? She's iconic as Alice, Project Alice, I think that is a great movie. I like where it goes. And also Michelle Rodriguez in the first one. I really like Michelle Rodriguez in that movie. She's like the hardcore, she always plays an army person in a lot of movies. Even in Avatar, she was army. But she plays such an iconic role in that movie. But I really like the Resident Evil films. I actually quite like those. Not a lot of people won't, but for me, that's memorable to me. This is what I'm talking about. When you have modern horror, people say classic modern horror is stuff like, where is it right here? I'm going to pull it out right here because we're going to have a look at this one. I know it's on the shelf here. I just need to find where I put it. And it's right there. People say Terrifier is a classic horror movie. This came out in recent years. They're still releasing films in this series. I think they released number 3 a couple of years ago. They might even do a number 4, perhaps. I don't know. I've never seen Terrifier. But I'm very aware of who Art is, and he's based on John Wayne Gacy, and that people are very much taken away by this story. And even even outside of that, you know, you have classics like Wolf Creek in there, Australian classics. Why am I putting it there? That belongs down there. I mean, classic horror really holds a place when you have good horror done right. It holds a place. But for every good horror movie, you have bad horror movies. Phone-in jobs like Goosebumps, you know, Goosebumps 2. I mean, it's nothing too fancy, but it's a movie, I guess. That's what I mean. For every bad movie, for every good movie, you have a bad movie. As I said, for every Nightmare on Elm Street, you have an old, you know, for every Planet of the Apes movie, you also have, I don't know if I got it in the collection. No, I don't have it in the collection. For every good Planet of the Apes movie, you also have the bad remake with Mark Wahlberg, you know. That's what I mean. Like, Paranormal Activity is a weird one. I didn't like Paranormal Activity, but I can respect it. That's what I mean. Like, for me, Paranormal Activity was very much like, just lock off a camera, simple, easy, let's just film what we can. I think with modern horror, there's too many principles being ignored. I think with classic horror, you create a classic iconic character. Or if you don't want to create a classic iconic character, then go the route of the Blair Witch. Let people fill it in themselves. Like, you don't see the ghost, you don't see whatever. There's many ways to do classic horror. To memorable things, like you don't have to have a franchise. You can essentially get away with just showing less. Less is more. But when I think of what makes a classic horror movie, I do think of They Live. You have to have it do well at the box office. Let's say that, you know, consumerism. But, you know, when I think of this movie, this one does resonate. I am wearing Rowdy Roddy Piper for a reason, you know? Even stuff like American Psycho. Very relatable, you know, people know about Wall Street and all that. Wall Street, I think it's Wall Street. Yeah, that's where the money is. But, you know what I'm saying? People do think like, oh yeah, I can relate to that. And like, there's a lot of little hidden things in here that if you're paying attention, it's like, is he alive? Is he not alive? Is this a dream? Is this not? Like, there's questionable aspects, and the writer has come in and said her piece about, no, this is actually what's the case with this movie. You know, people can still make up their mind about it, though. But this is what I mean. Classics are classics for a reason. And when you do horror right, it is really good. When you do it really bad, it's really bad. Obviously. I know people will probably say this is a good movie, but I don't like it. So yeah, tell me what you think. What makes a classic horror movie to you? Jump down in the comments and let me know. And that's been Physicality for this week. See ya.